Welcome to Conversations with Garmami. Our guest is Ken Fukushima. He's an architect, an artist, and a judoka. How you doing, Ken?
I'm doing really well, Garmani. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you very much for joining us here. We were chatting before I hit record, and we shared a lot of interesting. We had an interesting discussion, but I'm looking forward to this interview here, and I have a big question for you to start off our interview. Um, as we celebrate a century of judo in Canada, could you share what this significant milestone means to you personally, both as a judoka and a Canadian?
I think it's when you ask that question, it really gave pause for thought, right? Because it actually the actual I think 100th anniversary was just this past week, um, and it does make me think that, geez, I'm pretty old because out of the 100 years I've been involved with judo for like, I don't know, 55 or something. So more than half, more than 55, actually. Holy cow. Yeah, a lot of it. But what it gave for reflection was reminding me, about my instructor and his background, right? And then his instructor, like where did he come from? And like, as far as his instruction and learning judo in Canada. And how did that happen? And it is traceable back the 100 years, in a pretty straightforward trajectory from Kano Sensei, Jigoro Kano, the founder of the Kodokan of judo in Japan. And Kano Sensei was um, a really, really fascinating human. Yes, he's the founder of the Kodokan school, Kodokan Judo. But he was an educator and a diplomat. Um, he he was really interested in the power of judo as a societal influencer. If you think about it, we talk about influencers now. I mean, he was like, if, in those terms, we could look at Kano Sensei maybe in a way like that because he saw that it was more than just a martial art. And I think he started this like in the late 19th century in Japan, where there were a lot of jujitsu schools, and he looked at and tried the different schools and what they were good. Some are good at groundwork, some are maybe better at throwing, some are good at like submissions maybe. And he tried to put a lot of things together to create um, a school of his own, taking the good parts from other other teachers, right? But also expanding it to be foundationally an educational thing. That the pillars of judo need to be not just physical fitness and physical education, but also educational in terms of ethics and mental training, mental education. So he was an educator. He taught at university. He was a really strong proponent of judo being practiced not just in Japan but around the world. And he was a member of the IOC. Um, and I'd forgotten this, but Japan was supposed to host the 1940 Olympics. And Kano Sensei was actually traveling back from an IOC meeting, I think from Paris or something, and came through Canada on his way back to Japan. Anyways, it was his students who ended up coming to Canada, 100 years ago to start judo on the West Coast, some schools. And they had students mostly amongst Japanese Canadians living on the West Coast. And then, as I think most listeners would know, right, when the Second World War happened, all of the Japanese Canadians were on the West Coast were moved to internment camps and during the war, and including the judo instructors and students. and like they're students and then just kids, because they were in camp for 4 years, right? So they practiced a lot of judo in camps. And after the war, Japanese Canadians either they couldn't go back to Vancouver to the West Coast. They either had to go to Japan or move east of the Rockies, which is why a lot of Japanese Canadians came out to Toronto, where I am, but like to the eastern part of the country. And that's kind of how you can follow the path of judo schools in Canada, kind of through that path and that trajectory as well. So my instructor had started judo in Steveston in BC before the war, but then during the war he was in camp in Angler, and after the war, and he was doing judo in the camps during the war, and after the war he decided to go to Japan and lived in Kyoto. And Japan was devastated, right, in the war. Like there was nothing there except Kyoto as a city was salvaged. Like it was saved. The Allies spared the historic city of Kyoto. And after the war, it became actually a center for a lot of the martial artists. And there was a really thriving judo school culture practice dojo thing still happening in Kyoto after the war. And my instructor is lucky to be part of that environment. And then in the early 50s, he came back to Canada and started his clubs in Toronto. And that's my instructor. And I think, well, so what does that make me, like a third or fourth generation from these guys? And you start thinking, where's this 100 years go? And I'm saying, well, I feel kind of old because what am I? These guys were my great grandfather in judo or something, or like ancient history or something. Thinking, no, it's actually my instructor was like that line is pretty close. So it hits close to home, and I think that it's significant for me as a person, as a Canadian, because it really does sort of follow the trajectory of Japanese Canadians, what happened to them, and how we evolved and moved into society in different parts of Canada, and how judo became something that like is largely non-Japanese Canadian participants now in Canada, right? And it's one of the things that Kano Sensei, going back to the founder, really wanted. He really saw that could be an international thing. Like judo could be, it's not a Japanese thing. It should be an international thing, as I know and many of your listeners would know that it's like the second most popular, second most practiced sport in the world after football. Because it's something like 200 million participants or something, and something like that worldwide. Like it's practiced all over the world, and it's an Olympic year this year. It's just sort of really, really cool. And this year too, we have a strong team from Canada. It was interesting that the previous Olympics were back at home of judo in Tokyo, and I think that it's good that we have these reminders that we were far away from like 100 years. That was ancient, but at the same time, no, it's not. I'm still here. I'm pretty close to it, and I'm not the oldest one, like, because I have a lot of colleagues my age, right, or my generation, who are still there, still teaching, or still administrating, involved, and still around. And it's great. And it makes me think of tens of thousands of students who we've had through the club where I was involved with, and it's very, very encouraging. It really does warm my heart when former students would come back to the dojo. They left when they were teenagers or kids, or they left when they went to university, and they would come back and as adults, and they bring their kids to the class to start. I think that's really nice. It's
Right.
also, you start feeling really old. You start thinking, but it is that continuity and that sort of like it's continued, right? It wasn't a fad. It didn't just, it wasn't like I don't know, pogo sticks or something. Judo was something that it has evolved and is thriving. And I can see that it will continue to thrive.
How important is in terms of knowing the history of the sport in this country? Follow-up question: how important is that for the community? And also, it's a Canadian story as well, right? It's a made
Yeah.
in Canada story, so it goes. In my opinion, I think it could even expand to go beyond combat sports and into the sporting fabric of Canada. I have a bias. Obviously, I'm a fan of the sport, and I know this country is a great. You know, we're great at winter sports, but when it comes to summer sports, the Canadian team is doing really well. And I guess the question is the value of knowing history. How important is that for the community? And does it go beyond just the combat sports community to the broader Canadian community, in your opinion?
I think it goes at least to the broader community of fans of sports, um, because Canada has had a good um, record, maybe sporadic, but a good record in Olympic judo, for example. The first um, Olympics where judo was a sport was one of the sports was in 1964 in Tokyo. And the Canadian Doug Rogers won a silver medal. And it's not that long ago, I mean, we can remember, right? Like it was, well, Canada won a medal at the Olympics, right?
Right.
One or two or a few, or, like we won a couple bronze medals, we won some silvers to the stage now where we're expecting, we've got expectations to own the podium, for the last several Olympics. And we're favorites in many sports to bring home be on the podium, if not winning gold, right? And we have expectations for gold at it's not just at newer sports or winter sports, but 100 meters. Right?
Right.
It's like, no, these are like sports that like are worldwide, like, no, our athletes in Canada have worldwide status as champions in their discipline. And I think that we can look at this in judo was one of the few sports where a medal was won in 1964. And again in 1984. And then there was at the LA Olympics, but then in 92 was when it started to take off into a new generation when Nicola Gill, as a really young judoka, unexpectedly by many, right? Won a bronze medal as a young guy in Barcelona. And then in 96 was get my years right. 96 was Atlanta, right? And did he win a medal in Atlanta? I can't remember. But 2000 was in Sydney, and he won the silver medal against the great judoka Inoue, an amazing final. And then in 2004 in Athens, he was the flag bearer, right? Four-time Olympian.
Mhm.
And his athlete and then he became a coach, and Antoine Valois-Fortier won a bronze medal in judo as a youngster. And then he just finished his, I think, third Olympics in Tokyo, right? And then he retired. But he's a world medalist, Olympic medalist. And and we're at the generation where we're at now, where we've got a very strong team with having won uh, bronze medal in Tokyo. Well, we've got like multiple medal choice chances in coming up in Paris. and actually won 2 bronze medals. Apologies, we won 2 bronze medals in Tokyo, which was great. And it's just sort
Phenomenal.
of this progression where we're seeing it, and we're expecting the Canadian judo team to win medals at the
Mhm.
Olympics. But we're also expecting the Canadian team to win a lot of medals in a lot of sports at the Olympics. We're
Right,
expecting the men's basketball team to,
right,
to do really well at the Olympics.
right.
Uh, and I think it's just this broader community of just seeing how Canada as a sports nation has evolved um, in winter as well as the summer sports.
Mhm.
And yeah, I think that that's encouraging that we start getting more role models of young people doing things to be role models to other young people and adults too, right? Because as
Absolutely.
I've mentioned to you previously on a number of occasions, like young judoka now who are competing on the national team inspire me more than I inspire them. I mean, it's just like, wow, it's just really, um, it's really this symbiotic kind of thing, which is really, really wonderful. And it's
Absolutely.
not just every 4 years, right?
Right.
Maybe it's another good thing. I mean, it used to be also, right, with the Olympics. Yeah, we'd be interested in like, like whatever. We'd be in equestrian events like every 4 years because we were good at that in Canada. But then we wouldn't care anymore. But it's not that. And we've got maybe part of it too is by putting the Winter Olympics on alternating every 2 years that some of the sports they're in front of us more frequently, right? So that
Mhm.
we see the speed skaters every, and 2 years later, we're seeing that the athletics teams and the runners and the track teams and judoka, and then 2 years later, we're back seeing the mogul skiers and the speed skaters again, and we're seeing um, Canadians, right?
Mhm.
And we're seeing the Canadians doing really well in these venues, and I think as well the coverage of them has become in many ways too more lively and just more engaging
Right.
for audiences, and I think that's also good. If all of it encourages people to participate in sports,
It's a win.
it's a win.
Yeah. Absolutely. I just want to go back and mention that if anyone's interested in reading more about the 100th anniversary, you can check it out on Judo Canada's website. That's judocanada.org/100-3. And there's plenty of information there and resources, uh, explaining the history of judo in Canada. It's worth the read. Secondly, I also want to encourage people to check out Ken's interview on the Pro Sports Podcasters, episode 23. It was released, I believe, sometime in March. Was it in March? Yeah, it was in March. I heard it and I really enjoyed Ken, as I mentioned to you before we started this interview. I really enjoyed your conversation there on that episode.
Thank
Uh,
you.
yeah, and I think people should check it out and hear your story there. It was very insightful. I um I have a bunch of questions to ask, and I want to dive into, you know, the history. Obviously, you've coached judo for 3 decades. You're no longer you've retired as far as coaching. You're no longer coaching. But I'm wondering, someone who lives in Toronto, if you can give us the history of the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center, Judokai, also the state of judo in Toronto and the GTA. I know that's a big question, but I reside in Ottawa, and I'm just curious to know. Canada's such a large country. There's dojos all across the country, and I curious to know what the scene and the community is like in Toronto. So if you could speak to us about your dojo and the community, and yeah, big
Well, the
question.
Jap, yeah, um, the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center um, is a community center that was a vision, a dream of Japanese Canadians in the 50s. And going back to the first part of the conversation, after the after the internment of Japanese Canadians during the war, right, and a lot of moved east and ended up in Toronto and wanted to socialize or do things or just sort of get together. And there was some clubs where they would meet sort of informally downtown. But there was a vision, a bigger vision, and we should have our own center. But it should be more than just like, you know, a group for us. We should like being able to promote Japanese culture, like traditional painting and food and cooking and martial arts and music and there were organizers in the community who were strongly enough devoted to that to really keep pursuing it and eventually to build a building out in Don Mills and part in like the northeast Toronto. And at that time in the late 50s, early 60s, it was like way out there. It was and it was a really kind of a beautiful site. And they engaged a at that time young Japanese Canadian architect, Raymond Moriyama, to work with them to design this building. And it was a very simple but very understated but elegant design that did speak of Japanese aesthetics. And it was unique in a special way. And the community built it. And it was very proud that Lester Pearson came and opened it in 1963. And I think it helped a lot of Japanese Canadians feel like they were part of Canada, right? Because they felt ostracized during the war, and they were neither Japanese nor were they Canadian. But when they built the center, they felt like they could belong and promote this. And the motto has always been friendship through culture. And judo was one of the first programs that was introduced at the JCCC. And what happened then was the managing director reached out to, I think it was like the 4 top judo instructor clubs in the city, and asked them if they would volunteer to teach classes at the center. Well, they were like trying to make a living, right? But 2 groups said, okay, they would come and volunteer to teach classes there. And so it was one of the original programs from 63. There's been judo classes taught at the JCCC. And my older brother was one of the first students when it opened. And you know, when I was a few years later, I joined. And yeah, I was there since, right? A long time. We even moved the building. You know, we outgrew the building and moved to, you know, a really nice conversion of a different large building that's more accessible. The dojo there is really a really great facility. And you know, the programs have been good, the instructors have been good. And it's someone having been there as an instructor for, as I said, for over 30 years. I've seen the ebbs and flows in demographics, right? And like, you know, there were times when we had like, you know, 2 students or like, for a while, and then, you know, then we'd have like 100. It would be sort of in waves of things. And I think now, if anything, it's a little bit more stable in terms of overall numbers, but the demographic has changed a lot. Just anecdotally or observationally by me, that there's more older people taking it, like adults taking it. And I have to say, and I do say to adults who would listen, that I have a lot of respect for someone who would take up judo as an adult, because I wouldn't. It's like I would take up jujitsu, but not judo, maybe, right? Or aikido, because the hard part of judo is throwing. And when you learn throwing as a kid or as a teen or as a young adult, it's a little easier, because learning throwing is easy. learning falling is hard. And when you're a kid, you can learn how to fall. First of all, you're not falling from very high, and you're landing on mats, and your body is supple, and you're a kid, right? If you're 8, 9, 10, oh, sure. It's but when you're an adult and you start thinking about it, wait, what? This guy's gonna throw me, lift me in the air, and I'm gonna land on my back on the mats over here. And you see somebody else get thrown and slammed, and you go, yeah. And as a teacher, you're telling them, no, you have to relax. It's a little counterintuitive, but
Big
that's
time.
what it is. Like, you really do have to learn how to relax to fall without getting injured. And to be forceful at the moment of impact, but in the right technical way, right? That you don't get injured. And that's the first kind of skill that you learn in judo. We can't break falls, how to fall, and it's really boring.
Mm.
Okay, it can be really boring to learn that, or to spend classes practicing that. But it's very important in order to develop as a judoka, because you can't learn the freedom to apply throws and be the thrower unless you understand the feeling of getting thrown, and have that freedom both to throw and to get thrown, and without fear, right? But just sort of going through that. And the other thing that's more subtle, but it's part of it, it's inherent to that, and this is really foundational to judo and to people who, I think, go through judo. You learn how to fall, and you always get up. And this is life. You will fall. Don't be afraid. Get up. You're going to fall again. Get up. And no matter how many times you fall, you get up. And you just have to not be afraid of falling. Just go. You won't, and this is foundational to, beyond the hour and a half or 2 hours in a dojo. It's like
Right.
about what, you're going to hit things. Probably just keep that attitude of perseverance. Get up. Doesn't matter, get down, I'll get out. And so anyways, that's a long answer to part of your long question. And I would say, though, that the state of judo in Toronto and the GTA now is it's pretty good. And I think it's this kind of synergy, maybe because we see popularity in mixed martial arts, in particular in, for example, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Right.
And we would get people from jiu-jitsu clubs wanting to come to the judo club and try out a class, or see, could they train and do some groundwork with the judo guys, women, people, students. And it'd be interesting to observe too, the student, because you see, wow, these, like, they're really good on the ground doing groundwork. They're really terrible at standing work.
Right.
And standing work is hard to learn, and it's it can be frustrating to learn standing work, but it's also tends to be a bit more of a young person's game, right? And what's great about jiu-jitsu and groundwork is that you can do that as an old guy like me, like, you can do that.
Right.
Lifelong. Groundwork it happens slowly with control, and it's a great workout, and you can really develop your skills, and you can test your skills, right? And at that, it happens at a pace where you really don't have to worry too much about getting injured. And so, yeah, I think that's what builds up the interest in having more adults taking up judo now, and just even younger adults, like, continuing, right? And you don't see this, I think, in, for example, wrestling. I think you can kind of peak in high school. Maybe if you're really, really good in high school wrestling, you can go to university and be on the varsity team at university in wrestling. And then kind of like, there's not really a lot of lifelong wrestling clubs. And boxing too tends to be kind of sporadic and wherever it is. Sort of, but judo's like if you can latch into a club atmosphere or the club environment, it's something you really can participate in lifelong. And that's one of the goals of Judo Canada as well, and just sort of lifelong learning in sports, right? It's
Right.
not just in judo, but in all of sport Canada. It's a lifelong endeavor for a healthy living. And it's great that there's that gateway that you can do this. And it's not just physical, but there's a mental challenge to do it, you know, and also just a spiritual refresh of you know, good work that you can have. So I've often said that back in the day, when life was stressful, you go to judo class, you could get beat up or beat somebody up. Either way, you felt better afterwards. You know, it was
Right.
just like it's just very good. So I do see you know, clubs seem to be doing pretty well in the GTA. And again, I think there's that synergy between mixed martial arts and mixed martial artists wanting to get better at their grappling, being therefore interested in judo, and judo being sort of some receptive to people who are interested in that part of judo, and maybe they'll develop interest in other parts of judo too, like the throwing or kata, like forms and other aspects that are open in our sport.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think you're absolutely right. We're seeing more and more interest in the sport of judo coming from these other martial arts. If it's MMA, if it's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, you know, I think the sport it's going to be, from a communications perspective, it's going to be interesting to see, and not to switch subjects or anything like that, what's going to happen between the Paris 2024 Olympics and the Los Angeles 2028 Olympics, in the sense that now there's this huge audience of combat sports fans who are, you know, becoming more knowledgeable, I believe, on the sport of judo, because there's just so much content right now. IGF
Yeah.
is putting out a lot of great content,
Yes.
and also, you know, Judo Canada, etc. There's so much content out there. It's very dynamic. It's crafted in a way that will appeal to certain demographics. It's, you know, they're dancing with different tactics. So it's in the sense that it's targeted content, and I think from a communications perspective, I'm really curious to know, between now and the next Olympics, which it's in Los Angeles, the growth of the sport, particularly in the Americas, you know, Canada, US. I think we might see, you might see a new resurgence of potential practitioner players and just fans, like, you know what I mean, because it's such an incredible, dynamic global sport. And sorry, I'm going off on a rant here, but like,
No, I think it's all good. Like, 'cause I think building on your rant, um, it may spark more interest to specifically in America. Because internationally now in judo, America's not that great in
mm,
judo.
mm,
They were, um, they have been sporadically and over time, and probably like maybe 10 years ago, because Kayla Harrison, right?
right,
Two-time Olympic gold medalist. Ronda Rousey was a bronze medalist. Jimmy Pedro was a silver medalist, I think, right? But right now there aren't a lot of like podium hopefuls on the IJF tour who are from America versus in Canada. It's sort of like Canada and America at tennis, right? It's kind of like, you know, like Canada's got more top tennis players than the Americans do, right?
right.
So it's like, um, it's just, but as things get more, what's the word I'm looking for, exposure,
Mm,
right, and interest, then why not? I mean, yeah, you can go join a judo club, right? Like, let's go do this. If that person can do it, I can do it. You know, we can, why not? I like the sport. And you see, it used to be also that I think in the origins, earlier days of MMA, wasn't it really just more a contest to see how a judo guy would do against a striker,
Yeah, yeah,
or a boxer would do against a kicker? But
absolutely.
now that's evolved into, no, to be an MMA art, you have to be like pretty good at all of them, right?
Hmm.
Or it used to be, or to be cynical, you have to be kind of mediocrely good at all of them. If you're really, really good at one of them, you might not do too well.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then there are times when we start looking at them and go, why is this judo guy like trying to box? It's
Mm.
but it's because it's different, right? And this is, I think, growing pains and like how sports evolve. And that maybe MMA will just be, it's becoming its own discipline, right? It's just like, no, it's all of these things combined, and that is what it is taking these bits, maybe the way that Kano Sensei took different bits of different jujitsu schools and put them in and developed judo. MMA
True.
will evolve out of um, putting together the best parts of boxing, Muay Thai, jujitsu, judo, whatever, right? Trying to put them together. But then realizing, yeah, we need some rules.
Right. Of course.
How do we put rules on this thing to make it, like it's not really combat, right? We're not trying to actually, we want
Kill each
to
other.
shake hands at the end, and like at the end, you carry on and come back and fight another day, compete another day. But as we often would say to people at the judo club, who are especially adults, right? Like, who are maybe getting a little too serious during practice, and you say, you got to go to work tomorrow. That's like,
That's an excellent point, though.
and
That's,
so and so does
that's
your partner. Okay.
geez, absolutely. That's, that's an excellent point because I myself, as someone who needs to go to work the next day, I've seen it in gyms where as an adult, where people as recreationals, hobbyists, people who do it for the love, who might just crank it up and take it to the next level. And I'm talking about people in their mid 30s or 40s, and they injure themselves. I'm talking serious injuries, and it's not someone who has ambitions necessarily to compete nationally or internationally in whatever set sport. It's just, some dude in a gym trying to sweat, and there you go. He gets like a life-altering injury. Unfortunately, these things happen, but I think
Yeah, or
it,
they injure their partner, right?
yeah, oh
It's
yeah.
just like, and I think, we've done surveys with students before in the old days too, about like, which actually makes you feel worse, when you get injured yourself or you injure your partner. And it's like, people will admit, yeah, when I injure my partner, right?
Yeah.
Like it's, so be careful, right? Be
Mm.
respectful. That's also foundational to judo, is mutual respect, and that you
Mm.
both get better by helping each other get better. You both get better. Um, it's not an either or, and it's a mutual benefit by how you train really hard together to get better yourself. You will both get better. You understand that you both need to get better, and and that's also transferable to real life, not just
Absolutely.
in the dojo, right? But this is
Absolutely.
more of a societal thing.
It's interesting. I just want to mention this real quickly in terms of the values you speak of. I think that for practitioners of some other sports, I think they're coming to a realization that having values is integral to the development of one's sport and self. And I think judo's position, because it's a sport that really communicates and articulates its values through and through consistently, and this is my opinion from what I've observed as a fan who's observing various combat sports, amateur and pro, etc., that some of these other sports I think are beginning, especially for folks who are higher belt ranks. I'm speaking about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community. I think we're beginning to see the benefits of judo in terms of how it's established itself on the administrative side, but also having a core curriculum, values, and its history. You know, we're talking about in Canada, 100 years of judo in Canada, which is monumental. And as we were talking about, I think you mentioned, yeah, the JCCC, yeah, Japanese Canadian Cultural Center. The architect Moriyama, he also built I'm in Ottawa, so I'm familiar with the Canadian War Museum.
Yep.
He designed that, and I believe he passed away last year.
Yep.
You know, but I'm just mentioning it's he's because you mentioned him, and obviously you're an architect, of course, and it's interesting that he's a legend in Canadian. I think internationally as an architect. Is he not? Correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
he is, and in Toronto he did quite a few really important and well received and kind of almost iconic buildings. And for me as a young Japanese Canadian thinking about architecture is kind of like really a nice role model to have, like that
Right.
I could do this. And I became interested in being an architect because the original Japanese Canadian Cultural Center was my favorite building. I spent a lot of time there when I was a kid and growing up, but I just really liked that building. And even as I got, yeah, much older, and as an architect, I still had a lot of respect for that building, like as just as a work of architecture, as a building. You know, I think it was really, really well done. And there was a lot of angst in the community when the community decided to move away from that building to the new facility. And there was friction between the community, well, honestly, between the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center and Ray Moriyama, because there was some friction going on when the decision was made not to add on to and renovate and build an addition to the original building, but to sell it and move to another bigger building and convert that one to the new center. But you know, to his great credit, both personally, professionally, and to the community, he came very vocal then in his support for the new center, the new building. That you know, the building is just a container. What's important is what happens inside of it, and that the programs of the original Japanese Canadian Cultural Center had become successful enough that you needed a building that was 3 times larger. That's a good thing. And you know, it's a good evolution. And he designed and donated money. Well, there's the Moriyama Museum inside the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center now. It's like the Heritage Museum is named after him. And it's good for the specific Japanese Canadian generations, both, you know, the linear generation like myself of the immigrants who came initially, and like I would be the 3rd generation, and my kids the 4th, and then there's, you know, 5th-generation ones on that one. But there are many new Japanese Canadian, new Canadian people who immigrated from Japan after the war, like or more recently, right, or in the 2000s, and they're very much part of the community and part of the JCCC, and it's good that it's expanded, just not just a linear thing of the original immigrants, children's grandchildren and stuff.
Right.
But it's expand. No, these are just people who had nothing to do with the internment camps or any of that things. They just came over, like they're, you know, they worked for Toyota. They came over or something, and they got stationed here at the consul general's office or something for, you know, consulate, and they're here. And it's good to see that. And as I said, like most of the demographic of the judo class is like there's very few members who are of, you know, Japanese ethnicity. And it's the same in, I think, all the martial arts programs there. And the martial arts programs at the JCCC are doing very well, whether it's Aikido, Judo, Kendo, Iaido, Judo, they're all been doing very well because of the popularity of them. And what's good is that some of them are a little easier for, or more attractive to different age groups.
Mm.
Like Judo, Japanese archery, not something really for kids. Okay. But for adults, yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a good thing to do. But Judo and Aikido, there are other things, karate, no, those are good for kids. It's good for kids who they have kids programs for that. And you can take that as a kid and say, no, you know what, I just saw this other program over here now, and I'm tired of judo. Maybe next year I want to try something else. I saw them doing some cool things with like these long pointy sticks in the room next door. Maybe I want to take that. So sure. Yeah. And it's good to me. I see it, and not just because I want to see like the cultural centers thrive over that, but I think it's just that whole initial foundational thing of friendship through culture, and that people can find something and socialize, but just take an interest in something and meet new people and just find an interest in something. And I think that's I don't see a downside to that.
Yeah, and for sure. And I was looking at, I was on the website and I was looking at the prices for training, and I was like, wow, that is like incredibly affordable, like compared to
Yeah.
like I was like, wow, because anyways, some other gyms if it's judo or other martial arts, pardon me, it's the price is anyways, affordability is very good, especially in this economy, for families if you have more than one child, etc. It's
Yeah.
but I want to move on to this next question about you spent some time in Japan at Kodokan training, and I want to know, how do you feel this experience has deepened your understanding and approach to both judo and your personal life philosophy? And if can you tell us, can you go back to the moment you decided to go down that path to travel? Because I heard in a previous interview you did, as I mentioned earlier, that you framed it as you wanted to get judo out of your system. I think
Yeah.
I'm paraphrasing.
That's
Why can you give us the context as to why you framed it that way? I find that fascinating that you use that sort of those words, but give us more context. What was
that
going on?
was yeah, that was pretty much how I framed it. And I got wanted to get it out of my system. So, I was doing judo from the time from like I was like 9, and then right through high school years, and a lot of times in well, not just in Toronto, I think probably in Canada, like a lot of places, like students after high school, like it's hard for them to continue judo maybe because they go off to university, college, or they start working, or it's just uh, even now we're finding it's harder to keep them through high school sometimes. But I did it right through. And when I went to university, I was in an architecture program up in Ottawa at Carleton. And it's a really tough program. This wonderful club there, right? The Takahashis are a wonderful family. They were so kind to me when I was a student there. And they were great, right? And if you're from Ottawa or people in Ottawa know, the whole family is just um they're not just first class athletes in terms of their skill levels and their teaching and their dojo, their facility, but just as human beings. I can't say enough. So the family is just really wonderful. Um, and I went to their dojo and I practiced sometimes, but like, after the first month or so, the semester started, the workload got too hard and I couldn't go very often. It's, yeah, okay, I'll go when I can. And that's the time really when people are really, really super serious about judo. Like, they're really right in there. early 20s and really developing. And I could see, well, I'm not going to be a national champion. At that time, too, Phil Takahashi was my age, basically, and he was the national champion. I used to practice with him sometimes. He's like a pro. I'm just like a amateur guy. He's dedicated. He's going to be the next. I'm never going to beat Phil. I could be a good architect, though. Anyways, it was just that, and that was good with all of that. But after 5 years of university, and then I went to graduate school for a couple of years in the States, like artist school, and then after that, I came back to Toronto and was working. But I was wondering, well, I always wanted to go to Japan and just see how I could do with judo and just get it out of my system, right? And just sort of just go experience it and see what it was like. I was already a black belt, at the end of high school, but it was, or actually at the beginning of university, I got my black belt. But whatever, how many years that was, 7 years later, 8 years later, I thought, well, if I want to see what it's like, I should go now. I think it's going to be harder if I'm in my 30s or 40s and have a mortgage and some other thing. It's just quit my job and go play judo for a year, go see what it's like. So I I also didn't really want to be working forever either. So I got this thing called, like, at lunchtime, I went to the travel agent. I was working, but at lunchtime, I went to the travel agent and I asked, how much is a plane ticket to Europe? I had some friends who were living in Europe and teaching and stuff, so I want to go visit them. I haven't been to Europe. I couldn't afford to go before, but as an architect, I want to go to Europe. How much is a plane ticket? I think she said it was like, no, it's about $700. Afford that. How much is a ticket to Japan? So it's $1,400. And I'm thinking, maybe I could do both. I could go to Europe and then come back and go to Japan. And then she said to me, and they had it this time, or you could get a round the world plane ticket for $2,000. I said, what? And they used to have these things where you could buy a plane ticket between partner airlines. And as long as you didn't go backwards, you could stop as many times as you wanted, going in one direction around the world.
Wow.
So I bought one of those at lunchtime. And I did that. I went from Toronto to London, stayed with my friends in London for a while, took a bag and traveled around the continent and like Europe for a couple months. Went back to London, flew from London to Mumbai,
Oh, wow.
and then went from Mumbai to Hong Kong. And then I had to be in Tokyo because my instructor in Toronto had arranged for me to join classes at the Kodokan. And his connections in Tokyo were amazing, right? Like I was sort of aware of it before I left, but then when I got to Japan, I realized like how fortunate I was because my sponsor in Japan was the head of the All Japan Judo Federation.
Wow.
It was like,
wow.
So when I arrived at the airport, these two big guys, two big young guys, held up a sign with my name on it. I waved at them. Neither of them spoke English. They just said Ken Fukushima, Kodokan. Okay, yeah. So I followed them to this car. They didn't say a word the whole way. They drove me straight from the airport to the Kodokan, took me in the front door. I met a young administrative person, instructor, who worked at the Kodokan, who spoke a bit of English. He told me, oh yeah, Kudo Sensei, my sponsor, he said that we should be expecting you tonight. So then they took me up to the dormitory, set me up there, and then the next day I met Kudo Sensei. But it was like, wow, my Kudo Sensei is really important here. So, and so that was my introduction, and I had to be there, and then I enrolled also through my instructor here at a program for foreigners. It's like a Division A class, right, for like black belts basically to go. And the head of the international division was Abe Sensei, who was a close friend of my instructor because they'd been together in Kyoto after the war. So,
Wow.
and Abe Sensei was the head of the international division of the Kodokan. Very kind and very, but also way up there, right? These guys, this nobody guy who shows up from Toronto, right? Yeah. But so yeah, I got enrolled into classes, but I had a commitment as a student. I had to be at class 6 days a week. I could miss 2 days a month, something like that, to keep my visa. And participate in monthly grading tournaments. And yeah, it's just a great experience. Like, I mean, I met people, and the Kodokanas were judo people from all over the world are there. And so um, I met, because I was staying at the dormitory at the Kodokan initially, I met people from all around the world who were staying at the dormitory as well. And in that other podcast, I gave this really long story about meeting the great judoka, great humanitarian, great sportsman, Muhammad Ali Rashwan of Egypt. I met there. And it was just this amazing year, and about around a year and a half in Tokyo at the Kodokan, that I just met a lot of people, saw really, really, I mean, of course, high level judo, but in Japan, but also from the people who are coming from around the world to go there to study. Like, not like, little guys like me, like, nobody's like me, but instructors from other countries coming to like go there for their grading at the Kodokan and things, and take the kata courses and things there. And it was really good, and people were the instructors, they were very kind, but I could see how the eighth dan instructors really were over there, and the legendary instructors who were like these legendary all Japan champion competitors who were elderly, but they're the instructors who were overseeing the programs or the dojo. And within Japan, there were different rivalries between the different universities, and which is actually kind of cool. But it's because in Japan, how can you describe it? Like, it's like judo in Japan at universities is a bit like basketball at university in the States, right? It's like really
Wow.
highly competitive teams, and it's just like these schools. It's just like, yeah, it's really pretty amazing. But seeing that level and being around it for a while was like really, really life altering. And I met this man, Muhammad Ali Rashwan, who was a great Olympian sportsman, champion, and Egyptian. Many years later, he contacted me when I was back in Toronto and told me that his very close friend and his friend's family was moving to Toronto, and he asked me. He told me to treat his friend's children as if they were his, right, or mine. To and you know what it's like, right? If somebody's asking you, they're not asking you. It's like your obligation. And they do it. They're like my family. And my joke, yeah, my wayward family sometimes, but yeah, they're my family. And because they came to Toronto and came to the JCCC, years later, when Shetty and Mohab's family left Egypt, they moved to Toronto, and they came to the JCCC because that's where their cousins were.
Mm.
And so I said, yeah, it's not like I planned and recruited like these Canadian Olympian to be a member of my club. It just sort of was, fate, or
Serendipity.
serendipity or karma, or just, it's no, it's a development of a relationship that I magically established somehow in the late 80s, before Shetty and Mohab were born. Right?
Wow.
It's like,
Yeah.
so it's I'm very close to them personally, and of course, like as you know, as in judo and in my role as coach as they were developing and coach, I put that in brackets, right? It's like their sarcasm coach sort of thing. But it's like um, it's just been very inspiring to me, both as a judo person, but I think just more personally, that just to see this connection through life. I happened to be in Japan at the same time that Rashwan happened to be visiting there for a training session, and he
Mhm.
befriended me because he spoke English and was looking for somebody also slow who didn't like jogging to go running with him in the morning. So it's like,
That's awesome. I have I want to ask about this trip, this your decision to go. I want to go back to that, but before I do, I just want to quickly mention that there's a video that was released back in 2018. I think it was the Petro Canada Face video, the bond, pardon me, the bond, where it
yeah,
shows
CBC, yeah.
yeah, CBC, the bond. It's but basically it's a really interesting short form documentary, a mini doc of sorts, showing the bond between the coach and the player, the judoka, Al Nahas. And and I remember seeing this video initially, as I was telling you before we started this interview, and I was like, that was a really good video. That really told a very interesting, funny, uh, solid bond between coach and player. And I think content like this is brilliant. Like as a fan of the sport, but also from just looking at it from as a communications product, it's always fascinating when you can tell so much in such a short amount of time. You can show the power of like mentorship, coaching, and also humor, because you're sarcastic the way you're interacting with both of them. And it's interesting because I did watch the video again, and I'm like, man, that was 2017, 2018
Yeah,
when the video came out. And
yeah.
obviously, they're both competing. They're both doing great things, and fighting and
I'm so,
representing.
yeah, I'm so happy for Shetty particular that he had that goal, and he was young then, right? Like he was 18. Was it?
Wow.
He
Yeah.
was pretty young.
Right.
It
Right.
was 2017, so yeah, he would have been 19 years old then, I think. And then
Mm.
he was just embarking on this next step to go from being a national champion to being an international competitor. And the leap from being a senior national champ, an age from being a provincial champion to being an age group national champion to being the national champion, the senior national champion, and then to win medals um, in international competitions, and then to win medals at the highest level, like on the IJF tour,
Right.
and then to win competitions like slams, grand slams on the International Judo Federation World Tour, and to be, ranked, seeded going into World Championships and the Olympics. Like that leap is like so huge.
Hmm.
Each step is so huge. And to see Shetty is the only one who's made all of those leaps in the over 30 years of, kind of being involved as a teacher in judo, 50 plus years of being involved at all with judo.
Wow.
But it's it's I feel so happy though to see how he is still as a person. And we see this in the videos of him afterwards. Like he's always like he'll take selfies with kids, and he's just he's respectful to his opponents even when he's unhappy, which happens. But he's shakes hands with his opponents, and I think it was very sincere and very very heartwarming at the Pan American Games last October, which were in Santiago in Chile, and the gold medal match he was against the Chilean. And Shetty won, but right away held up his opponent's hand
Right.
to the crowd.
Yeah.
Right. And led the crowd in clapping for his opponent, the Chilean. And and he was saying afterwards, like they're buddies, they're friends, they know each other. And it was, he wanted to win, of course, but he wanted to acknowledge his friend. And this is important, right? Like, because as we tell anyone at judo class, I mean, all the stuff we teach you at judo about, like, whatever you're doing at judo, about mental training or about like morals or ethics or any of those things. Okay, so you're here what, for like an hour and a half, 2 hours? What's important is what you're doing for all the time you're not here. Okay, these are things that are supposed to translate, but you're healthy physically, mentally, you're just a good person, you're respectful, if we give you a hard time about being late for judo class, it's just like to be respectful about time when you're not at judo class. But I think that's just these things about it's all in context, and to see an example like Shetty, who's like an Olympian, and at that level of competitive athlete, also sort of embodying those things. He's not like out there dissing his opponents and things, but they're doing things that are being respectful still, and being like, he always acknowledges his brother. And I think that's what's important, right? Family and life after that you bow out. It's like, and yeah, that's really important.
It is, yeah, absolutely, and you're right. Like even after all his matches, you always see a genuine act of respect for his opponent, his sport, and his team and everything he represents. I think he's quite the ambassador of the sport, and very entertaining to watch. I say entertaining to watch because I mean you look at his matches. And I think we've been saying this for years. If you watch him fight, he's always giving 110%. And I think I just think for Canadian sports, especially when you consider how dynamic the sport is visually, and especially from a combat sports. As a combat sports fan, I think if you were ever to show someone who's not familiar with their sport what this sport is about, in terms of like dynamic visuals, very entertaining fights, and it's fun to edit his matches, I must admit.
I was just gonna say, like, you put together such a great reel after the Antalya Grand Slam. Like, also to the soundtrack, the Voodoo Child was great. But I mean, it's just but the highlights, like he gave you the highlights, and Anthony Corelli, the announcer, described him after the Olympics last time. He was like, described as, he's like a knockout puncher.
Right.
When you watch Shetty in judo, he's sort of like that kind, because a lot of times he wins with these just spectacular throws. And that's true. And he burst onto the scene on the world tour by having spectacular throws. And people were wondering, who is this guy, right? Where did he come from? And then it got harder, more difficult for him. And people, of course, they study their opponents, right? And try to overcome those things. And Shetty acknowledged, and has been acknowledging, that he's what the part of his game that's evolved is his ability to be more tactical and to be more strategic in his matches. And he laments the loss in the bronze medal match at the Tokyo Olympics because it was really a tactical thing he could have done better, right? I don't want to say it's a mistake because neither of us and very few people have been in that position, right?
Right, of course.
Have that opportunity even, but
Mhm.
and I would never call it a mistake. I just say, it's a lesson. He was over anxious. He was eager, and in the
Right.
end, it's like, yeah, he made a mistake, and the guy who threw him was like the two-time world champion. It wasn't like someone who just took up judo or something. It was like,
Right.
and but I believe, and he said this, and he's using that has used that now as his motivation to fuel him for podiums and at the Worlds and at the Olympics coming up, and that's why he doesn't want that feeling again.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, he's certainly on fire, and we wish him all the best in and as he heads towards the next big thing. There's so much to talk about that, but I just want to go back and I appreciate. I know we've been talking for for quite some time
wow,
now. For a while, yeah. How long has it been? Has it been about like almost 2 hours? No,
an hour and a bit.
an hour and a bit. Okay. 15 more minutes?
Yeah,
If
I'm good.
that's fine. Okay. I
Yeah,
just quick.
my dog got up and he just sort of slowly here.
Okay.
That was him changing positions. It's okay.
He probably wants to go for a walk.
Yeah.
I'll just I'm really enjoying this interview. I have a few more questions to ask in regards to actually real quickly, you know how you decided you went to that travel agent and you asked that
Yeah.
question, how much is to go to Europe, how much is to go to Japan. Do you ever think back and say, like, I mean, it's awesome that you took that trip, that you explored, and
Yeah.
not everyone does that, right? Some people take the leap. Some people say, I've always wanted to, I want to do these things. They mean something to me. And in hindsight, it sounds like, and I've heard the other interview and I could feel it. I could sense that it meant a lot for you back then. And obviously it did for a variety of reasons. Do you ever think about, like, what if I had not gone on that journey? Like, you know what I mean? Like, cause like, did you ever think about that? Like,
I guess not, because I don't I can't think that
right,
I did.
right.
But what I do think about on it is I did that, and then it's like one of those things like I'll address it now. So why am I, like hesitant about doing this now? Something like why am I hesitant about starting my own company, or why am I
Mhm.
hesitant about doing whatever, right? Moving, or why am I, it's, I guess you kind of get more, it's not really philosophical, but it's just more zooming out a bit more and saying, well, what's holding me back? Because like, the only thing holding me back ever is me, right?
Mm,
And living is a leap of faith,
absolutely. Yeah.
right? Every
Yeah.
day. And I think, and maybe this is something that I became more sensitive to through and over the pandemic and afterwards. But yeah, it's like remembering that, and reminding oneself that tomorrow isn't promised to anybody.
Mm,
So what are what am I afraid about doing today, or what am I putting off till tomorrow? And putting it off till tomorrow, I guess it wasn't very important.
mm.
Um, and then, I mean, of course, there's also, we get always say, well, we can talk ourselves out of doing a lot anything, right?
Right,
It's
right,
it's always easier to not do something than to do something.
right.
To take that leap of faith and just do it. It's just like, it's really, if I put the effort into focusing on it instead of avoiding it,
Mm.
why don't I do this? Then, I'll come around, yeah, I could do it. Right, I could do this.
It's really cool that you did it, because I'm always fascinating when people, the stories you hear about when they do what they really want to do, what they're passionate about. You wanted to get judo out of your system, as you described it. You went over there, made friends, had a very awesome experience training, furthering your appreciation and development for the sport. And then you came back and you taught at the dojo for 3 decades, right? You coached. And I mean, it's clear that the sport is a way of life, obviously, for you, and it means um, a lot to you personally. And I wanted to know, in terms of those 3 decades of coaching, you're teaching many lessons to all sorts of individuals who want to learn the sport. What are some of the most impactful insights you've gained about yourself and others through all those years of coaching and sharing the sport of judo? Big question again, sorry.
Yeah, but I think what it really is, Carmen, I mean, and I think this is something I've observed with other teachers in the club, or not even just in our club, but um, I really felt that if the students weren't able to do something, if the students weren't learning something, it was it was on me as the teacher to change what I was teaching or how I was teaching things. And or just because I would do it this way doesn't mean that everybody should do it this way. Or just because I learned how to do it this way doesn't mean everybody should learn how to do it this way. Yes, there is a basic way to execute a technique, to develop it, but there's not a single way of how to teach that technique. And if they're not learning it, or they're not able to do it well, maybe it's me, not them, right? Like it's
Mm,
not, I need to adapt, or some people are learning it, but others aren't. Like it's, well, why aren't the other ones able to understand it? How can I change how I communicate with them or demonstrate, or is there a way I can try to um, do this? And more importantly than that, are they enjoying this? Right?
mm,
Or are they just, am I just, trying to make them learn this? You're going to learn this whether you want. No, no, I want them to enjoy the experience, and they should feel that no, that the instructor, the teacher is there to try to help them learn something about themselves. And we talked about this, I think, earlier, that the first thing you learn how to do is to fall, so you can learn how to get up. And
mm,
it's physically, yes, specifically, you learn how to fall, break your fall, and how without getting hurt and get up. But it's more that attitude that even if it's not easy, it's but you persevere a bit and you accomplish it, you feel really good about that. And I got a lot of happiness out of seeing just for example, a kid who couldn't do just a regular forward roll, be able to do one, or couldn't
mm,
do a cartwheel, be able to do one, or be able to, do be able to do one. Like that was so much more joyful for me than seeing like a naturally athletic student be able to do something really athletic. Right?
right.
It's not that I wasn't happy for them too, but it was just like, no, that the bars are different. And I think that's where I started to understand more about being fair doesn't mean treating everybody the same, right? Being fair means treating them equally specially. And and it doesn't mean like you teach the same lesson to everybody fits all kind of thing. And the standard is the same for everybody for what you need to learn. Maybe we need to teachers adapt to the person sometimes. It's like in this last 3 weeks, this person learned way more than the other person did, even though they, from where they started to where they are now. That development is huge compared to the other person, even though the other person, might on surface look to be much more accomplished. But again, after we bow out and they go home, I want them both to feel good about what they've done and what they've learned and feel encouraged. Hopefully encouraged to come back and keep learning, but just feel good about themselves, right? And to feel good about the teacher was nice, the other students were nice, and it just was a good experience.
I think my screen might be frozen. Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay. As long as you can hear me, your screen's frozen, but okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
I can hear you. I can see you.
Okay.
I'm gonna ask you two more questions, and
Okay.
if that's okay, we'll
Yeah.
we'll wrap up in 5 minutes. So, you've been exposed to a global community of judoka. Certain qualities tend to be universal. In your opinion, what are the core characteristics that bond judokas together?
I think it goes back to these things of these characteristics of perseverance
Mm,
and resilience and always getting up, not being afraid of
mm,
failing, because you can't succeed it unless you put yourself at risk of failing, right?
right.
Things and mutual respect. And when I was in Japan, I had this really became a really good close friend with an expatriate Canadian who had been living in Japan at that time for 7 years. He's about the same age as me, he's the same size. He's just a really great guy. And he just really taught me a lot about toughness
Mm,
and being tough. He was a kind guy. It wasn't like tough and mean to me, but he was just like very encouraging and just sort of like in those ways of just being tough and you can do this, right? And just go out there and just like you have that attitude of somebody you can be my size, like small, but still go out there and be like me. Well, it's great in Japan, like the grading tournaments. It's the old-fashioned way of it's just like if you're a first degree black belt, you fight other first degree black belts, and then when you beat enough of them to get enough points, then you can qualify for your second degree black belt, right? And then but it's not by weight or age. It's just by, if you're at that skill level, you compete against other people at that skill level. So
mm,
you might be little like me and have to fight somebody who's like twice your size or something in a competition, right, to get your grading points. But you just go out there and you do it. And that was kind of cool, right? To be able to do that. And I mean, the funniest thing was like I had once, I had to, I'm, I was 60 kilos then, barely. And one competition, I had to go like my opponent in the grading tournaments, this guy's like over 100 kilos. Like, so he's like huge, right? He was younger than me, but he was just like huge. So, but we're also black belts, right? Same level. So. And as we starting our match, I can hear my friend this other friend up in the stands watching, yelling out to me. He says, "Don't worry, he just looks big." I'm trying not to laugh. Going out.
man.
So yeah, whatever. Fast forward, like I don't know, 20 years. When Shetty's like in one of his first competitions in Canada, he's fighting in the heaviest division, which was over 66 kilos. He weighed like 68 kilos, I think, right? He was like, what, 12, 14 years old. And his opponent was some guy from out west who weighed 124 kilos.
Oh, wow.
Bigger than the guys he fights now, right?
Right.
And we joke about it now, like his cousins and his parents said, "No, but Shetty, your dad was praying for you." And And they were worried he was just gonna like die, you know, and get like squished. And I just told him that Shetty was, don't worry, he just looks big. Anyways, Shetty beat the guy. Right? It
Nice.
was one of those things. But it's those things of just, yeah, you can be, don't doubt yourself, just go out there and do it. And just like, but you know, you don't have to be too serious about it either. It's a game, right?
Right.
And just and have some fun with it. So that's, I think the qualities are yeah, you're resilient about it, you persevere, you know you're gonna fail sometimes. That's part
Mm,
of like getting better, but you get
mm,
up and you keep going. And that's, you know, and that's, and you be respectful to your opponents and to the sport, to the referees, even if you disagree with them. It's just a match, right?
right.
And yeah, you move on. So,
Last question for you, Ken. By the way, I really appreciate your time and everything you're
all right.
sharing with us. This has been it's been awesome. With the upcoming Judo World Championships and the anticipation building for the Paris 2024 Olympics, do you have any particular thoughts or predictions on what we can expect from these events?
Expectations are high for Team Canada both.
Mm,
And in specifics, Canada is very strong in on the men's side in one, two, three divisions out of seven. Canada is very strong
mm,
competitors. Under 73 kilos, Arthur Marchelidon. Under 81 kilos, Francois Gauthier, Grappo. Under 100 kilos, Shadi Alnahas. So those three, like they're ranked generally top 10 in the world, right? So I mean they're very much in there on the border. Under 66 kilos on the men's side, Julian Frescador right now has a, I think he might be a continental qualifier for the Olympics, possibly. Like he's very hard to qualify for the Olympics. All of them plus some others will be competing at the World Championships, and if they do well there, they get qualifying points, so they could bump into, you know, qualifying for the Olympics, um, as well as under 90 kilograms. Louis Cribergagnon could qualify if he does really well at the tournaments leading up to the including the World Championships.
right.
On the women's side, under 57 kilos, number one and number two in the world, right? Krista
Wow.
Deguchi and Jessica Klimkate.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, number one and two in the world in the same weight division, and only
Mm,
one of them can go to the Olympics, right?
mhm,
So it'll be interesting to see how they do at the Worlds. You know, just see how they do in the tournaments leading up to that. But Jessica won the bronze medal at the Tokyo Olympics, but right now in rankings, Krista's ahead of her. So
mm,
very, very strong competitors, and they're both equally deserving. Under 63 kilos on the women's side, Kat BP, Catherine Boschnap, yeah, she's great. She's bronze medalist at the Tokyo Olympics, and I think world, she might be world number one still under
yeah, I
60,
think so.
so it's definitely up there, right? And she's a medal favorite, a contender for sure.
She's
And then on
awesome.
the fringe,
She's awesome.
on the yeah, and on the fringe under 52 kilos, Krista Deguchi's younger sister Kelly Deguchi's got a chance if she does well in some of the qualifiers. And under 78, over 78, there's some one younger competitor and one older competitor who are trying. They're kind of on that borderline. And again, if they can do well in the tournaments leading up to the before the Olympics, the Grand Slams, they have a chance maybe to qualify.
Mm,
So it's good. Some for and then the Olympics and the Worlds and the Olympics also have mixed team competitions, right? But you have to have three women and three men who individually qualify for the Olympics of a certain set, like, within
Right.
the weight categories for the mixed teams, Canada's got 5 of the 6 locked in, but you need 6 to be one of the teams that qualify for it. So it probably won't, unless yeah, we need one of the either Coralie or Anna Laura to really pull it out at the World Championships, and then maybe we can qualify, and then we'd have a team. But I'm excited. I think we can expect. And that's the thing. We talked about this earlier, right? We're at the same. No, we expect medals. And it used to be, well, we hope. We're not just hoping for medals. No, Judo Canada expects medals, and the athletes themselves are expecting medals. I mean, that's their. And I've had this conversation with Shetty for a long time. I think if the goal is to make the podium, in my opinion, is if the goal is to make the podium, you won't make the podium. If the goal is to win the gold medal, you'll make the podium. I believe that everyone who's going to be on that podium is believing they're going to win the gold medal. Okay. But if you're just hoping to make the podium, you might. But I mean, it's just at the Olympics, the level of competition, the intensity is so high, and the it's not the frequency of match. I mean, you have like matches all on the same day, and there's no easy matches. And they come up on each other pretty quickly before the final rounds, and under a lot of pressure. So I mean, it's an amazing tournament, and we're fortunate too that with the IJF, the International Judo Federation, has Judo TV. There's a lot of social media feeds. You do really great things of putting together things as they're happening, and shortly after they're happening as recaps, so people can see what's going on. And in the old days, we'd have to wait for like black and white photocopy newsletters to come in the mail or something of what happened. But to see these things now, the enthusiasm, support, I think it's exciting, and I'm really, really looking forward to seeing it. I mean, it's just experiencing it. And France is such a judo country, like number 2 in the top 3 in the world, right? Like Japan, France, and Georgia probably have strong teams and strong participation. It's a huge vibe. Shetty often talks about how the vibe at the Paris Grand Slam is amazing, just because the crowd is so. I mean, it's like going to a hockey game in Canada, right? It's just like the vibe inside a small arena is so enthusiastic and knowledgeable. It's should be wonderful.
I wouldn't be surprised if that sport takes over, because, as you mentioned, that country is so judo mad that sport takes over in terms of just coverage and popularity. Just the buy-in there. They have such an educated crowd, right? And the history of judo in that country, and
it's part of curriculum as physical education in so many countries around the world, which is why judo is practiced all around the world. It's just seen as a really good sport for physical education, because you do work on some strength training through isometrics, like body on body weight, but you work on leverage, you work on balance, you can work on stamina, you can work on flexibility, but all of these things you can develop through, and coordination. And again, this whole thing is learning how to not fall or learning how to not get hurt when you fall, and building that mentality up, that these are things that are very yeah, just so from a common sense point of view about like this would be good for everybody to learn that physical
Absolutely.
things. And I think I mentioned this, before, like you saw uh in the NFL, like who's Miami's quarterback, Tua? Like was a couple years ago, he had those like massive concussions.
Mm,
And you saw the replays of how he fell, like he just flopped back and his head like slammed against the turf.
right.
And in the off season, he took judo lessons to learn how to fall without smacking your head on the ground because that was like a
Oh, that's
fundamental
cool. I,
thing.
I I didn't know he took that. Yeah, that's very cool.
That's,
Mm,
that's, um,
practicality.
well, if we think about in American football, and same with hockey, right? When you're all armored up, like I mean,
Mm,
you deal with contact differently. So when you're not wearing padding, equipment, helmets, but it's also with contact and falling, right? And you learn how to protect yourself more with movement and just, like saving your head,
mm. Yeah,
saving your head. It's
that's
like
so integral.
protect
That's
the head,
important.
protect
Yeah,
the head. But
yeah.
you forget that when you're wearing a helmet sometimes, right?
Right, right.
People forget that. And that's why in judo, like that fundamental thing of just like, protect your head and just you'll be okay.
Mm,
And I think that's why judo's popular as a form of physical education around the world. You don't need judo gis even. You don't need a lot of equipment. You don't need, mats are good.
sure.
Soft ground are good, but it's something that a lot of people can participate in. It's not age discriminatory or size discriminatory
Right.
or gender discriminatory. It's
Mhm.
like participate. And
Even if you're visually impaired, right?
even if
It's
you're
very,
like Priscilla's
yeah,
doing really great, like at the
right,
Paralympics, and we've got some good things coming, some good athletes participating in the Paralympics as well
that's right.
coming up. So
Yeah,
that's, yeah, we're
very inclusive sport. Very inclusive. I just I want to thank you again for this opportunity and your time. And I think it's 100 years of judo in Canada, and we've got the Olympics in less than 90 days, and potentially, as you were saying, many Canadians will be aiming for that gold and making the podium. So it'll be as fans, it'll be incredible to watch. Will you be going? Will you be going to Paris?
No, I don't think I'll
No.
be able to go unless Shetty or somebody can like snag some tickets for him. But like, but the other part of that is just the inspiration to a new generation of
Mm,
potential judo students, right, or aficionados, or people who want to take it out at any age. But just, I think seeing successful athletes who you can relate to because they're from the country or they're your size or they're not your size, but it's just, just um, it's just encouraging and hopefully we can get more and more interest in judo, just in every sport, just in like activity, right? Just it's it's good. There's not a downside to it.
absolutely. They're role models, as you were saying. The role models for everyone. I
Yeah,
see. Oh, I see. I think I
my
saw
dog.
your dog. Yeah. I think.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ken. Have a
Oh,
wonderful
thank you
week.
very much, Carmen.
This has been awesome. Thank you.
No, thank you so much.